You stand at the edge of a world both familiar and alien. The air presses heavier here, not in heat but in weight, the way a thick blanket might rest upon your chest. Your breaths are slow, almost deliberate, as though the atmosphere itself asks you to move gently within it. There is more carbon here, more breath of stone and volcano, less of the sharp sweetness you know as oxygen. It smells faintly of minerals after rain, of warm rock and ancient salt. Before you, the sea lies vast and open, stretching beyond the reach of the eye. But its surface is different, smoother in some moments, then trembling with ripples that catch the dim, fading light. The sun here sinks slower than you're used to. The sky does not shift from gold to night in a quick sweep. Instead, it lingers, spilling long shades of copper and soft bruised purple across the high clouds, the colors drawn out as though time itself has slackened. The sand beneath your feet is coarse and uneven, studded with small fragments, not shells, for shells are still rare in this young ocean, but thin plates of calcium, splintered remains of creatures that lived their brief spans and settled here among the grains. Each step is cushioned slightly, the grains larger and heavier as if they've not yet been worn smooth by millions of tides. There is no birdsong, no trees swaying. The absence is as deep as the air is thick, and in that absence, every small sound stands alone, the slow hiss of the tide curling back into itself, the gentle pop of a bubble breaking on a wet rock, the almost imperceptible creak of your own joints as you shift your weight. You look toward the horizon, and the sun, low but stubborn, drags its pale fire toward the water's edge. The light is refracted strangely through the denser air. The disk seems larger, heavier, casting wider bands of glow that shimmer as though the air itself is trembling. The water mirrors these bands, creating long corridors of light that seem to draw you forward. You inhale again. The taste of this place is strong, saline and metallic, with a trace of something organic, something alive yet unseen. It clings to the back of your throat as though reminding you that this is a younger, rawer earth. The ocean before you is a womb, and it breathes slowly, the way a sleeping giant might breathe. A breeze stirs, low and deliberate, sliding in from the water. It does not whip or scatter the sand. It moves like syrup, carrying with it the scent of unseen life. Somewhere beneath the slow waves, entire worlds shift and turn, waiting for the darkness to deepen before rising. The sun dips another fraction lower, and the first hints of shadows stretch toward you from the low rocks along the shore. Their surfaces glisten, wet from the last high tide. In the small pools left behind, something stirs, a flicker too quick to catch clearly, but enough to remind you that this coast is not yours alone. You remain still, letting the air settle around you, letting your breathing sink with the slow, patient rhythm of the sea. Here, dusk is not a moment. It is a state of being. A long inhale before the night releases its hidden voices. The horizon darkens almost imperceptibly, and you realize you have not heard another human sound for what feels like hours. Only the pulse of the ocean, only the weight of the air, only the slow, patient turning of a world not yet ready for anything loud. The weight of the atmosphere seems more present now, as though each breath you take is part of a much older rhythm. You can feel it pressing faintly at your ears, a quiet reminder that the air here is denser, its composition tilted toward gases your body doesn't fully know. Every inhale is warm and mineral-rich, coating the back of your tongue with a metallic tang, as if you've drawn breath from inside a cave. It's not unpleasant, only different, heavier, something that makes you instinctively slow down. Above you, the sky stretches wide and patient. The clouds move with an almost languid certainty, dragging themselves across the heavens as though they, too, are bound by the thickness of the air. They aren't the sharp-edged cotton tufts you might know from home. Instead, they are smeared across the horizon in long, diffuse ribbons, orange melting into violet, violet fading into the deepening blue of early night. Every now and then, the sun dips a fraction lower, but never in a rush. Here, the end of the day feels stretched, drawn out like the last notes of a song allowed to fade until silence takes over. This slowness makes the world feel heavier, as if the weight of the sky is leaning down just a little, drawing you closer to the ground, grounding you in a way that feels ancient and steady. The light it casts is different too. In this denser air, the glow scatters more generously, spilling across the water in a wide molten ribbon. It clings to the mist just above the waves, turning the sea's breath into something tangible, something you could almost reach out and hold. And in that golden haze, the faint silhouettes of strange life flicker just beneath the surface, shapes without names drifting in and out of sight as if teasing your curiosity. You move slowly along the edge of the shore, careful where you place each foot. The ground is slick with moisture, the sand granular and clumped, binding together under the pull of the receding tide. With each step, a faint sucking sound rises from beneath your heel, as if the earth itself is reluctant to let you go. Further out, the waves are unhurried, rolling with a deep, deliberate power. Each one breaks not with a crash, but with a heavy sigh, its foam dissolving lazily into the air before folding back into the sea. The tide's rhythm is steady and certain, an eternal conversation between ocean and sky, and you feel yourself leaning into its cadence. The breeze shifts. It's subtle, but in this thicker atmosphere, even the smallest change feels significant. It brings with it a layered scent, wet stone, salt, and something faintly organic. There's a sweetness there, almost floral, though you know there are no flowers here. Perhaps it comes from the microbial life that coats the shallows, their presence unseen but unmistakable. As the colors overhead deepen, the first stars begin to appear, slowly, reluctantly, as though pushing through the weight of the atmosphere. They shimmer faintly, their light softened and diffused by the haze. They are smaller than you're used to, dimmer, but no less beautiful for it. In fact, their subtlety makes them feel more precious, like secrets shared only with those patient enough to wait for them. You pause for a moment, standing still in the damp air. The horizon seems impossibly far away, yet also closer than it should be, the curvature of the earth subtly altered by the haze. There is no horizon line as you know it. The sea and sky merge in a seamless blend, as if the world itself hasn't quite decided where one ends and the other begins. Your breathing slows further, sinking almost unconsciously with the long, drawn-out exhalations of the sea. In as the waves rise and push toward you, out as they recede, dragging sand and shells back into their depths. It feels as though you could stand here forever, locked in this perfect, unhurried loop between ocean and air. Somewhere far down the shore, you think you see movement, just a shadow slipping between the rocks at the water's edge. It has gone as quickly as it appeared, leaving only the faint ripple of disturbed tide pools in its wake. The sight stirs something in you, not fear exactly, but a deep awareness that this place is not empty, and the stillness you feel is only the surface. Beneath it, life is waiting, watching, and moving in its own slow, deliberate way. The air thickens again as night creeps closer, settling on your skin like a warm mist. And as you take another breath, you realize you've begun to match your pace, not just to the sea, but to the sky itself. Slower, deeper, more patient than you have ever been. You drift toward the places the tide has only recently abandoned, where the sea leaves its quiet signature behind. The ground here is not merely wet sand, it is textured, organized, patterned by both water and life. In the failing light, you notice how the surface gleams in bands, pale, then dark, then pale again, like the breath marks left by a sleeping ocean. Your steps slow, not from effort, but from a growing sense that every inch of this place is busy with tiny stories you can't see until you kneel and look closely. You crouch at the edge of a shallow runnel. The floor of it is lined with ripples, long, low ridges, each one the memory of a wave. They are not random. They march in patient rows, each crest catching a softer shade of dusk, each trough holding a darker line of moisture. If you run a fingertip along one ridge, the grains hold their shape longer than you expect, as though the water has taught them discipline. Between the ripples, a thin film sways, the skin of microscopic life stretched like silk across the sidewalk. Sinan glistening where the last light lingers. The film is a living carpet. You can't see individual cells, but you can sense their congregation. A faint sheen, a satin drag against your skin when you test the surface. Where your finger presses, a tiny bubble struggles free and pops with a delicate sigh. The air it releases is older than your breath, a chemistry from a time when the sky wore different clothes. The smell is faintly sweet, faintly mineral, a suggestion of damp stone and warm brine. You withdraw your hand and the surface slowly reforms, smoothing itself, mending the soft disturbance. You move along the flats and the patterns deepen. Here, the ripples arrange into chevrons where cross-currents met and argued, the V-shapes pointing toward the sea as if the sand remembers the direction of home. There, the crests are sharper, edged like small dunes. A tiny channel threads among them, and in its quiet flow, the living film peels, bends, and clings, making curtains that tremble with each passing breath of water. The curtains hold tiny beads of gas that catch the last color of day, a string of dull pearls sliding toward the ocean. You pause where the ground changes from soft to springy. Under your weight, the surface yields just a little, elastic as if layered. When you press more firmly, water wells up around your heel, clear at first and then murkier with disturbed grains. What seemed like simple mud is in fact a stack of communities, pigments and filaments and films, one upon another, building a quiet city that rises and falls with the tides. The top is olive gray where light has been feeding the day's labor. Below, the tones shift toward shadowed brown, then almost black, where oxygen has not reached and other chemistries take over. The breeze tidies a strand of hair across your face, and you notice the mats are not uniform. Some patches glimmer with an almost metallic sheen, where the surface is so smooth that dusk itself seems to have pooled a dent there. Others are dappled with tiny pits, each a little crater rimmed by a darker ring. If you listen closely, you can hear the smallest noises, soft fizzing, almost imagined, the sound of trapped gases finding their path upward, the quiet talk of microscopic workers closing a day's work. You trace a finger's width stream that threads the flats like an ink line. It turns and turns again, following the gentlest slopes. The sides of this stream hold their shape cleanly as if cut, their walls a firm edge of living gel that resists collapse. In the shallow flow, flakes of mat tear free and sail like rafts, catching on ripples and settling to stitch themselves down again. The movement is unhurried and ceaseless, a drift that neither fights nor surrenders, but simply becomes part of the place it crosses. The light has thinned to a cool, even wash, and the sky's copper has given way to violet and blue, and with it the flats take on a dim glow of their own. Nothing supernatural, only the way even darkness, when it rests on water, seems to have a sheen. Your eyes adjust, finding detail where moments ago there was none. Faint contour lines of capillary tracks, the tidy loops where a small current eddied and then let go, a glossy film stretched across a pool like the surface of a patient eye. You stand again and walk with care, placing your steps between the sharper ripples, letting the soles of your feet learn the grammar of this place, the long sentences the waves write, the punctuation of pits and bubbles, the paragraphs of darker patchwork where mats are thickest. Where you step, the ground remembers for a moment. The water creeps back in, edges return, impressions soften until the verse reads as it did before you arrived. A few midges drift above the surface, primitive wings catching a hint of starred. They do not hum in choruses here, they pass like thoughts. When they land, the mat flexes under their tiny weight and springs back untroubled. Farther out, at the very margin where the flats surrender to the sea, small tongues of water arrive and retreat, careful as nurses tending a sleeping patient. Each touch lays down another fine layer of order, smoothing, combing, then leaving it be. You pause by a pool that is neither tide nor stream, but something in between, a round basin cupped by the flats. The surface is motionless except where the skin releases minute breaths. Beneath the skin, filaments sway in place. Not quite plants, not quite anything you would name, only strands that follow light when it is offered and rest when it is away. Even at rest, they are not idle. They arrange themselves, thicken and braid, building a softness that will take the shape of the next day like a mold takes the shape of water. The first true dark gathers, and with it the flats grow quieter still. The sea is a steady hush, the sky a deepening dome. You feel warmth rising from the mats, a stored day slowly letting go, and the air close to the surface is just a shade sweeter than above, as if the ground itself exhales comfort. You breathe with it, slow and even. It is easy now, in and out, as the world around you persists in its fine, patient work. From here, the shore stretches in both directions in a long, low arc, a language written by water and life, read best at this hour when nothing competes with it. You let your gaze follow that arc until it dissolves into the softer dark, and then you bring your attention back to your feet, to the patterns, to the gentle yield and return. You are a visitor, welcomed not with flourish, but with a quiet invitation to slow down and notice. A star appears, then another. They are faint and far, but constant. You take one last look at the ripples, the films, the tiny wells of breath, and you rise. The flats glimmer behind you like the underside of a calm night. Ahead, the shore curves toward low silhouettes where the mats give way to broader basins, where more secrets collect and hold the sky. You walk on, following the hush of water, and the flats slip back into their own rhythm, their soft work undisturbed, their patient pages ready for the next tide's touch. You step down from the rippled flats into a stretch of broken stone where the sea has carved shallow hollows in the rock. Each one holds the last of the tide, clear water cradled in bowls of dark basalt, their surfaces unbroken except for the quiet movements of what lives inside. These pools are like windows into another layer of this ancient shore, and each one shows you a different fragment of life's story. The first pool you lean over is not large, perhaps the span of your arms, but it holds a quiet crowd. Trilobites, no larger than your hand, move along the bottom in slow, deliberate arcs. Their segmented bodies catch the low light, each plate outlined in shadow, each ridge traced in subtle bronze and green. Their antennae sweep ahead of them in gentle probing motions, feeling their way across the stone. When they meet each other, they pause, adjust their course, and continue on as if navigating by an unspoken agreement. You watch one pause over a patch of fine silt, its many legs working in a careful rhythm as it stirs the grains. The disturbance releases tiny motes into the water and they swirl upward like faint smoke before settling again. Others trace the edges of the pool, climbing over the small ledges that mark the rock's fractures. Their movements are unhurried but constant, like the ticking of a clock that does not measure minutes or hours, but a deeper, slower kind of time. The water in these pools is still warm from the day, holding the last heat of the sun. Your fingertips hover just above the surface, and you feel a faint humidity rising. The air here is richer still, carrying not only the salt of the sea, but the subtle musk of life, organic and faintly sweet, like leaves after rain, though no leaves have yet existed on this young earth. Every so often, a bubble breaks the surface, a tiny, perfect circle that swells, trembles, and vanishes without a sound. Moving to another pool, you notice the variation in their shapes and colors. Some basins are deep and round, sheltering larger trilobites whose shells bear the wear of years, edges dulled, plates darkened to a mottled gray. Others are shallow, holding juveniles with lighter, almost translucent carapaces, their spines sharper, their movements quicker. In one pool, the water is stained faintly green by a thin layer of algae clinging to the walls, and trilobites crawl across it, leaving temporary paths that close again after they pass. The light now is soft enough that the water surface reflects the sky as much as it reveals the life beneath. In some pools, the reflection of a single early star hangs on the water, shifting gently with each ripple caused by a moving limb or a flick of antenna. It's as if the trilobites and the stars share the same space for a moment, the boundaries between sea and sky blurred in these stone bowls. A faint sound draws your attention, the soft scrape of shell against rock. You lean closer and see two trilobites meeting head-on, their antennae touching briefly before one tilts slightly, allowing the other to pass. The scrape is not loud, but in this stillness, every sound is magnified, the details of their lives carried to you through the water and air. You notice, too, that the pools hold more than trilobites. Small worm-like forms slip between the plates of rock, vanishing into cracks as soon as they are seen. A slow drift of sand at the bottom hints at tiny creatures burrowing unseen. Each pool is its own small world, self-contained yet connected to the sea that will reclaim it when the tide returns. You sit for a while beside one of the larger pools, letting your eyes rest on the steady movements below. The trilobites move in loops and lines, always returning to certain points as if the rock itself guides them. Time seems to settle here, the pools holding not only water but a kind of patience, the kind that comes from cycles repeated countless times before you arrived and will continue long after you are gone. The air cools slightly as the last of the sun's light fades. Shadows deepen in the cracks of the rock, and the pools take on a darker hue, reflecting only the softest glimmers from above. The trilobites remain at work, undisturbed by the shift from day to night. Their world is constant, the rhythm of their lives set by the tides and the quiet pull of the moon overhead. As you rise to continue along the shore, you glance back at the pools. Their surfaces are calm, but you know beneath that calm there is movement, slow, deliberate, endless. You walk on, the sound of the sea just ahead, the trilobites receding into the silence of their own time. You leave the stillness of the tide pools and move toward a softer stretch of shore where the rock gives way to sand shaped by the slow retreat of the day's tide. At first glance, it seems quiet, just a long, flat expanse, damp and glistening in the dimming light. But as you walk, you notice the surface is not as smooth as it first appeared. It is dotted with small mounds, shallow depressions, and tiny holes no wider than a finger. The pattern is irregular yet purposeful, as if the beach itself has been gently worked by unseen hands. You kneel near one of the small holes, and the scent of wet sand rises, a smell of salt and minerals, but also something faintly organic, the whisper of life hidden just beneath the surface. You wait, watching the hole without expectation, and then you see it, a slow, deliberate pulse, the sand around the opening shifting slightly, almost imperceptibly, before settling again. It's as if the shore itself is breathing. These are the burrows of priapolids, unassuming worms to the eye, but masters of the sediment. Beneath your feet, their bodies thread through the sand, moving with quiet persistence. They leave winding tunnels behind them, reshaping the shore grain by grain. Sometimes they rise toward the surface, pushing their heads into the open air for just a moment before slipping back down, leaving only the faintest ripple behind. You watch another mound nearby. The sand stirs, then bulges slightly, collapsing inward as the worm retreats. A tiny release of air escapes, bubbling up through the damp grains in a single trembling sphere before it bursts. The sound is barely audible, a delicate sigh swallowed by the weight of the atmosphere. But here, in the absence of any other noise, you hear it clearly. Further along, you find a section of shore where the patterns are denser, the mounds and holes spaced close together. The effect is almost like a miniature city, each burrow a home, each tunnel a street, the slow movements below mirroring the steady, purposeful activity of life above in later ages. You press your hand gently to the surface. The sand is cool and slightly firm, the structure beneath reinforced by the worm's own architecture. You can feel faint vibrations through your palm, the shifting of bodies moving, the subtle transfer of energy from one hidden life to another. Occasionally, a priapolid emerges just far enough for you to glimpse its body, a pale, smooth cylinder ringed with faint grooves, tapering toward a mouth that is more tool than face. It tests the air briefly as if tasting it, then dips back into the safety of the sand. These appearances are brief, almost shy, yet their presence is everywhere. Every step you take is cushioned by their work, the sand held together by their invisible weaving. The waterline is not far away. In the shallowest stretches, the burrows are half-flooded, and you can see a different rhythm here, the gentle sway of sand around the openings, grains shifting with the current as worms adjust to the movement of water. The light from the fading sky filters down into these pools, catching the motes of disturbed sediment and turning them into tiny drifting sparks. As you sit in the damp sand, the shore around you begins to hum with a subtle liveliness. It is not sound in the usual sense, but a sense of presence, a quiet awareness that you are surrounded by countless small lives, each moving in its own slow, unhurried way. The air grows cooler and the breeze carries the smell of the sea deeper into the beach, mingling with the scent of the living earth beneath you. You find yourself breathing in time with the burrows. The sand rises and falls in soft, irregular pulses, each mound and hollow part of a larger hidden rhythm. There is no rush here, no sudden flurry of movement, only the steady, patient work of creatures who have no need for haste. The tide is far enough out now that the nearest waves are only a faint murmur, but you know it will return. When it does, it will wash over this place, filling the burrows, collapsing some, deepening others. The worms will adjust as they always have, Di. And by the time the tide retreats again, the shore will be remade, different in shape but not in spirit. You rise, brushing the dampness from your hands, and look back over the patterned sand. It is alive in ways most eyes would never see. The priapolids breathe and move beneath its surface, their quiet labor weaving the shore together, grain by grain. You continue along the coast, the patterns fading behind you into the soft darkness. You walk on until the sand beneath your feet becomes firm again, the grains packed tight by the pull of the last high tide. Ahead, the shoreline changes character. Low, rounded mounds rise from the shallows in wide, layered steps. They look like stone at first glance, but the way they gleam in the fading light is different. These are living structures, built grain by countless generations of microbes, each layer the quiet record of another day spent breathing sunlight and seawater. The terraces step gently into the ocean, their edges washed in the slow glow of dusk. The air here is richer still, heavy with the mingled sense of brine and something faintly metallic. You pause at the edge of the first mound. Its surface is slick and faintly yielding under your fingers, not hard like rock but dense, layered and warm from the sun's touch hours earlier. The color shifts with the angle of the light, from deep olive in shadow to a muted gold where the last rays spill across it. Each terrace is ringed by a shallow lip that traps a thin film of water. In these pools, the surface tension holds perfect reflections of the sky. Fading violet clouds drift there as if painted into place, interrupted only when the breeze lays a ripple across the mirror. Within the water, you see threads of green and brown, filaments of the microbial builders themselves, swaying gently as they release tiny bubbles. The bubbles rise slowly in the dense water, catching the final glints of daylight before slipping free into the air. You step carefully across a narrow channel that winds between two mounds. The water here is warmer than the air, and when you pause to watch, you notice how the flow is slowed by the terraces. The edges create sheltered pockets where sediment settles in fine drifts, and over time these drifts become part of the living mass. The microbes work invisibly, binding grains together, layering pigment over pigment until stone-like strength emerges from what began as nothing more than cells and sunlight. The soundscape here is quieter than the open shore. The terraces break the waves into smaller size, so the water moves in soft murmurs instead of sharp crashes. You hear the slow trickle of tiny overflows, water slipping from one level to the next, always seeking a lower place, always finding it. It's the sound of persistence, the slow shaping of the shore by organisms too small to see but too numerous to be ignored. You rest your palm on the surface of one terrace, feeling the faint give beneath the outer skin. Somewhere beneath your hand, millions of microbes are conducting the same silent work their ancestors began billions of years ago. They do not know you are here. They do not need to. Their rhythm is as old as the oxygen in the air, the very air you are breathing now. As the sky deepens toward night, the terraces take on the colors of the water. Where the sea reflects the last blush of sunset, the mounds seem to glow faintly from within. Where the water has gone shadowed, they fade into darkness, their outlines softened. The tide is low and most of their surfaces are exposed, but you can see the faint line where high water will return, flooding them again, cloaking their work beneath the sea's protective skin. You climb a little higher, finding a wide terrace near the water's edge. From here, you can see how the mounds extend in both directions, a string of living steps curving away into the misty distance. Each one is slightly different, some round and smooth, others scalloped where the water has worn them more sharply. Yet together they form a single system, a quiet fortress against the tide. The air is cooler now, and the scent of salt is stronger. The breeze has shifted, carrying the soft hiss of the distant surf. You take a long breath, filling your lungs with the mingled age of air and ocean, and you realize the truth of this place. It is both alive and ancient, changing and constant, fragile and enduring. You linger until the light fades almost entirely. The reflections in the terrace pools darken to the color of ink, and the bubbles that rise from below catch only the faintest glimmer from the stars now waking overhead. Somewhere beyond the horizon, the tide begins its slow return, ready to flood these living steps again and begin the cycle anew. You step down carefully, the water lapping softly at your ankles. Behind you, the terraces keep their silent vigil, each one a layered archive of a billion sunsets, each one ready to outlast you by another billion more. The terraces slope gently into the water until your feet meet the cooler currents of the shallows. Here, the seabed changes again, not bare sand or layered mats, but a low, irregular garden of pale, porous shapes. They rise from the bottom in cups, cones, and fluted walls, some no larger than your hands, others wide enough to cradle a sleeping child. These are archaeocyaths, ancient sponges, architects of the first reefs. The water around them moves slowly, slowed further by their shapes. The evening tide is still low, and many of the larger forms protrude just above the surface, beating with droplets that catch the dim starlight. Where the sea covers them fully, it moves through their porous walls in patient swells, carrying the invisible drift of plankton and microscopic life that feeds them. You wade forward, the water rising to your knees. The floor beneath is firm here, stitched together by the interlocking bases of the sponges. Your footsteps are muffled, the sound absorbed into the soft architecture of the reef. In the quiet, you can hear faint clicks and pops, tiny pockets of air escaping through the water, and perhaps the gentle shifting of shells and fragments caught between the sponge towers. Leaning close to one of the larger cones, you can see the fine network of holes that lace its sides. Each opening is a doorway for water, drawn in and pushed out by the slow contractions of the sponge's inner chambers. The current that emerges is faint but steady, creating small swirls in the dim light. Tiny particles glimmer in these swirls, drifting past like the faintest snow. The reef stretches outward in clusters, with channels of open sand winding between them. In these sandy lanes, other creatures move, trilobites again, smaller this time, skirting the sponge bases, their antennae sweeping the grains for scraps. In one channel, you catch the flick of something softer, a worm-like body retreating into the shadow beneath a low arch of sponge. You pause near the center of a wide cluster. The archaeocyaths here grow closer together, their walls leaning toward one another like old companions. Between them, the water is calmer still, and the sounds of the open shore fade to a distant hush. In this sheltered pocket, time feels even slower. You could stand here for hours and see only the smallest changes, a new bubble forming on the lip of a cone, a tiny particle settling into place, a passing trilobite tracing the same path as the one before. The colors are muted now, soft grays, pale creams, hints of green where algae have claimed the upper rims. In the fading light, these tones seem to dissolve into the water so that the reef is less a structure and more a texture, an extension of the sea's own body. The archaeocyaths are not fixed monuments. They are breathing walls, shifting imperceptibly as they build themselves upward and outward, layer upon patient layer. As you stand still, you begin to feel the water's subtle pulse. It is not the force of the tide, but the sum of countless small movements. The synchronized draw and release of the sponges, the slow strokes of passing creatures, the rise of tiny bubbles from unseen mouths. The whole reef seems to exhale together, an ancient rhythm that predates every sound you know. You dip your fingers into one of the sponge cups, the water inside warmer than the open sea. It smells faintly different here, still salty but with a softness to it, as though it has been held and gentled before being returned to the current. Beyond the reef, the horizon is nearly gone now, the boundary between sea and sky lost in the deepening blue-black of night. Stars are emerging in clusters, mirrored faintly in the rippling surfaces between sponge towers. Somewhere in the distance, the first edge of the tide whispers against the outer terraces, the sound reaching you as a low, continuous sigh. You take a final look across the reef, its shapes rising like ancient ruins, though they are not ruins at all, but living rooms for the first architects of such things. They will be here long after you move on, filtering the sea, shaping the shore, catching the slow drift of life in their patient walls. You step away carefully, water streaming from your legs, and head toward the darker waters beyond, where other stranger shapes move in the shallows under the growing moonlight. The water deepens slowly as you leave the reef, the sandy bottom dipping into a gentle basin. The last ribbons of twilight fade above you, their soft glow filtering through the surface in long, wavering shafts. In this muted light, movement on the seafloor becomes harder to see, shapes blend into the sediment, and only the subtlest shifts of shadow reveal what's alati. It's in one of these shifts that you notice the first Wawaxia. At a glance, it could be a lump of debris, oval, low to the ground, its back covered in a mosaic of small, overlapping plates that catch the dim light in dull flashes. But as you approach, the plates stir. The entire creature begins to glide slowly forward, propelled by muscles hidden beneath its armor, leaving behind a faint track in the fine sediment. Its body is fringed with long, sharp spines, rigid, tapering blades that tilt slightly as it moves, like the quills of a hedgehog bending in the breeze. The spines are not for show, they are shields, making the Wawaxia difficult for any would-be predator to swallow. Between the armor plates, soft dark tissue flexes with each motion, giving the sense that this is not merely a shell but a living fortress, constantly adjusting as it navigates its small world. You kneel in the shallow water and watch. The Wawaxia moves with unhurried certainty, its mouth parts, small rasping plates, scraping gently at the thin film of microbial life coating the sediment. It leaves a clean, pale trail behind, like a farmer harvesting a strip of field. Another Wawaxia grazes nearby, and for a moment their paths intersect. They do not fight, do not hurry, only adjust, each sliding past the other in a silent, mutual understanding of space. The light dims further, and the spines of the Wawaxia catch the moon's first reflection on the water above. The metallic glint is faint but striking, little flashes here and there as they shift position, each spark disappearing as quickly as it came. When they pause to feed, their bodies are almost indistinguishable from the stony seabed, blending seamlessly into the low ridges and scattered shell fragments. A small current rolls through the basin, carrying with it a thin veil of sediment. You watch the particles drift across the Wawaxia's armored back, sliding down between the plates before settling to the sand. The creature doesn't flinch, doesn't shake them off. It simply keeps grazing, undisturbed by the small rearrangements of the world around it. In the dim stillness, you notice others, dozens, perhaps more, spread across the basin floor. Some are half buried, only the tips of their spines protruding. Others rest at the edges of small hollows, their armor catching just enough light to reveal their presence. Together they form a quiet community, each moving in its own slow orbit, each tending its patch of the seabed with the same steady care. The water here is warmer than expected, holding the day's heat beneath the basin's protective curve. Small bubbles rise occasionally from the sediment, perhaps stirred by deeper burrowers beneath the Wawaxia. Each bubble travels upward in lazy spirals before vanishing at the surface far above, where the starlight wavers in the gentle swell. As you linger, the sense of time loosens. The Wiwaxia have no urgency. Their world moves at the pace of feeding and resting, of night following day in an endless cycle. The quiet is deep here, broken only by the faint rasping of mouth parts on sediment and the soft hiss of sand shifting under slow bodies. You reach a hand toward one of the closer individuals, stopping just short of touch. Its spines glint faintly, and for a moment you imagine what it would feel like. The cool firmness of the plates, the unexpected weight of a creature so small yet so armored. But you leave it undisturbed, letting it continue its ancient work. When you finally rise, the basin stretches out before you, a dim field of armored grazers under the fading light. They seem almost like scattered leaves on a quiet forest floor, each one exactly where it should be, each part of a system far older than you. You step carefully, placing your feet in the spaces between their slow paths, and make your way toward the faint shimmer of movement farther offshore, something stranger still, waiting in the deeper water. The basin's slope rises again, leading you into a belt of shallows where moonlight reaches the seafloor in shifting liquid patterns. Here, the water feels lighter against your skin, the current moving more freely between scattered stones and ridges of sand. The quiet grazing of the Wiwaxia fades behind you, replaced by the occasional flicker of movement, swift, deliberate, and unfamiliar. It's in the edge of one such flicker that you see it, a shape unlike any other in these waters. The body is long and narrow, banded with subtle segments that flex in smooth undulations. Its color is muted under the moon, soft bronze and pale green, but the light picks out glimmers along its surface as it glides just above the sand. At its head, 5 eyes rise on short stalks, each one swiveling independently. They do not blink, they sweep, they track. The most striking feature, though, is the flexible appendage extending from the creature's face, a trunk-like limb ending in a claw that opens and closes in slow, deliberate snaps. You watch as it hovers over the sand, the claw dipping occasionally to pluck something small from the surface and draw it toward a hidden mouth. The motion is careful, precise, as if the creature is reading the sand's surface by touch. This is Opabinia, one of the strangest hunters of its age. It moves with the confidence of something that has perfected its craft, never rushing, never wasting energy. Its 5 eyes work in unison without ever looking the same way, a continuous scan that leaves no corner of the shallows unobserved. You crouch low in the water, letting the current hide your presence. The Opabinia drifts closer, its segmented body bending slightly as it changes course. One of its eyes, perhaps more than one, turns toward you, and for a moment you are caught in that alien gaze, unsure whether it sees you as part of the landscape or as something worth remembering. It passes within arm's reach, the trunk-like limb curling toward a small hollow in the sand. The claw dips, closes, and rises again, holding a wriggling worm no longer than your finger. In a single smooth motion, the worm disappears into the hidden mouth, and the Opabinia resumes its glide without breaking rhythm. Around you, you begin to notice more of them, 2, then 3, then 5, each moving through its own small hunting ground. Their paths sometimes cross, but they do not compete. Instead, they flow around one another like currents in the same stream, their bodies bending gracefully to avoid collision. The 5-eyed gaze never ceases, scanning sand, stone, and water alike for the smallest sign of movement. A soft surge of current rolls through the shallows, and several Opabinia rise slightly from the seafloor, their limbs trailing, eyes pivoting upward as though sensing something beyond your sight. The surge passes and they sink back down, resuming their patient patrols. The moonlight above brightens briefly as a gap in the clouds opens, and for a moment the shallows are lit in silver. The Opabinia gleam under this sudden clarity, their segmented backs outlined sharply against the sand. You see the subtle play of muscles beneath their armor, the way their bodies ripple in perfect coordination from head to tail. Then the light softens again, the clouds closing, and they fade back into the subdued palette of night. You follow one for a time, watching as it explores the base of a low rock outcrop. The claw-tipped trunk slides into a narrow crevice, withdrawing with a struggling crustacean in its grasp. The Opabinia maneuvers it quickly to its mouth and swallows, leaving only a few drifting fragments to settle on the sand. The air above the water is cool now, and the sounds of the open sea reach you in muted pulses. Beneath the surface, the Opabinia continue their work, tireless and measured, their many eyes ensuring nothing goes unseen. You step carefully through their hunting grounds, each movement slow so as not to disturb the delicate patterns they trace through the shallows. Ahead, the water deepens again and the moonlight thins into shadow. Somewhere beyond, larger shapes move, figures whose presence shifts the very texture of the current. You take one last look at the five-eyed hunters, their alien grace etched in memory, and step forward into the darker water. The sand beneath your feet slopes downward, the gentle incline leading you away from the safety of the shallows. With each step, the water grows cooler, the current steadier. The silver glow of moonlight above fades, replaced by a dim, shifting haze that blurs the shapes at the edge of your vision. Here, the sea feels larger, more open, but also less forgiving. You pause, letting your eyes adjust. In the distance, something stirs. It is not the flicker of a small hunter or the slow grazing of a seafloor dweller. This movement is broader, heavier, and yet carried with a strange grace. The shadow passes between you and the faint light filtering down from the surface, and even though it is still far away, its size is undeniable. It draws nearer, and the water itself seems to take notice. The current shifts subtly around you, pulled and pushed in long, rolling pulses that match the rhythm of its movement. Then you see it clearly. Anomalocaris, the largest predator in these seas, gliding just above the seafloor with an elegance that belies its power. Its body is long and streamlined, segmented like a ribbon of living armor. Along its sides, a series of undulating lobes ripple in perfect sequence, each motion propelling it forward without a single wasted gesture. The light catches on its surface in faint bands, sliding across its smooth exoskeleton. At the front, two great appendages curve forward like scythes, each joint bending with precision as they sweep through the water. They open and close in a slow rhythm, the hooked tips flexing inward as if tasting the current for signs of prey. Behind them, a circular mouth ringed with plates turns slightly from side to side, a slow testing motion like a lock searching for the right key. The eyes set high on stalks gleam faintly in the dimness. They are large, unblinking, and restless, scanning every angle of the sea around it. Even from here, you feel their weight, as if they could strip away the water between you in a single glance. You remain still, heart slowing to match the rhythm of the sea. The Anomalocaris moves in a wide arc, passing to your left. It does not rush, but its presence fills the water, an unspoken authority that leaves smaller creatures melting into the sand or vanishing into crevices. Its great appendages sweep once, twice, as if brushing aside the invisible veil of night to reveal anything worth taking. A small shadow ahead catches its attention, a fish-like creature, quick but too far from shelter. The predator tilts slightly, its lobes adjusting like the wings of a bird banking into a turn. In one smooth movement, the curved appendages close around the prey, drawing it inward toward the waiting mouth. The circular plates flex, the prey disappears, and the Anomalocaris resumes its glide without pause, its hunt already beginning anew. As it passes closer to you, the scale of it becomes clear. Its body is longer than you are tall, its appendages easily able to encircle you if it chose, but it doesn't. For now, you are only another shape in the darkness, not worth the effort. Its eyes pass over you once, the way a hawk's shadow might skim a field, and then it drifts away, the rippling lobes carrying it toward the deeper water offshore. The current it leaves behind brushes over you like a tide of breath. It carries the faint scent of the hunt, brine, silt, and the metallic tang of life taken. You remain still until the last trace of its shadow fades into the distance, leaving only the steady pulse of the open water around you. Far ahead, something else stirs, slower, softer, but with a presence that lingers. You take a step forward, letting the cool darkness close around you, ready to follow where the deeper currents lead. The seafloor begins to rise again, the soft sediment giving way to patches of smooth, dark stone. Here, the current slows, curling around the edges of flat rock slabs that tilt and step upward toward the surface. Your feet find firmer purchase as you move, and each step brings you into a quieter zone, less the rolling pulse of the open sea, or the intimate stillness of a tide-washed platform. In the dim half-light that filters through the water, you begin to notice patterns on the stone. At first, they seem like random depressions, small ovals no wider than a coin, scattered in pairs or lines across the surface. But the more you look, the more a path emerges. These are footprints. They do not belong to anything heavy or fast. The steps are close together, sometimes meandering in curves, sometimes straight and purposeful. Between some of them, faint drag marks show where a soft, segmented body brushed the stone as it moved forward. You crouch, running your fingers over the impressions, and find that they are fresh, the edges crisp, the shallow depressions still holding tiny pockets of silt stirred from elsewhere. You glance up, and a flicker of motion confirms the maker of these trails. Out from beneath the shadow of an overhang, a lobopodian emerges. Its body is long and flexible, segmented but unarmored, the surface glistening in the thin light. Along its underside runs a row of stumpy paired legs, each ending in a tiny claw that grips the stone before lifting again. The movement is deliberate but steady, each step placed with quiet assurance. It moves with an exploratory patience, its head swaying gently from side to side as it tests the surface ahead. From its body extend delicate hair-like filaments that quiver in the water, reading the currents for hints of food or danger. Every few moments it pauses, lowering its head to the stone as if tasting it, then resumes its wandering. A second lobopodian appears from a nearby crevice, smaller than the first. It follows a different route, its steps crossing the other's trail in places, sometimes doubling back. Their paths intersect without hesitation, as though the world is wide enough here for both to roam without conflict. You stay low and still, watching them work. They are not hunters in the way the Anomalocaris was, nor grazers like the Wawaxia. They seem more like foragers searching for small traces of microbial mats clinging to the stone, or perhaps sifting the tiny creatures that hide in shallow pools left behind by the last higher tide. When they find something, they halt, their mouthparts working in tiny rhythmic motions until the food is gone. The longer you watch, the more you see the faint shimmer of another lobopodian moving in the distance, the soft disturbances in the silt where one has passed, the way the footprints begin to overlap in certain places until they form dense, almost decorative patterns. The water here is cooler, and the stone beneath your hands holds the day's warmth only faintly now. You feel a light current moving across it, bringing with it motes of silt that settle into the footprints, marking the passage of time since they were made. Some of the oldest prints are already half-filled, their edges softened, soon to vanish entirely when the tide shifts again. You rise slowly, taking one last look at the winding trails. They are small things, these footprints, but they are the map of a night's quiet labor, the patient record of creatures that leave no other mark on the world. When the next tide comes, they will be gone, and the lobopodians will set out again to make new ones, always moving, always tracing their invisible routes across the stone. The rock ahead rises higher still, forming a shallow ridge that catches the moonlight from above. Beyond it, you hear the muted pull of water around larger structures, the deep, rhythmic tug of the ocean working against something heavy. You take a breath and step toward it, the patterns of footprints fading behind you into the soft dark. You crest the shallow ridge of stone and feel the water shift around your body. The change is subtle at first, a faint pressure at your side, the suggestion of movement where before there was only stillness. Then it builds, not in speed, but in certainty. The tide has begun to turn. It is a patient thing, this pull of the moon on the sea. There is no rush in its advance, no sudden surge that startles or shouts. Instead, it comes like a slow breath drawn over miles, a gathering of countless drops answering a distant command. You feel it on your skin before you see it, an unbroken current that brushes past you, steady and deliberate. The water along the ridge begins to rise in delicate increments. First, the smallest pools left in stone hollows brim again, their surfaces quivering as the first thin threads of the returning tide seep in. Then the lower shelves are covered, the edge between wet and dry erased without a sound. The ocean does not crash here, it unfolds. You stand still, letting the current wrap around your legs. It is cool but not biting, carrying with it the scent of the deep, stronger salt, a metallic whisper, and the faint musk of unseen life stirred by the movement. Tiny particles ride the flow, glinting faintly as they pass through stray shafts of moonlight, drifting like slow snow across the dark water. Looking outward, you can see the tide's progress as a living texture. In the distance, the open surface is dimpled with subtle, overlapping ripples, each one nudged into being by the returning push of the sea. Closer in, the movement is smoother, more like a single sheet folding forward, covering the shallows in an unbroken sweep. The soundscape deepens. The quiet of the low tide, gentle trickles, isolated drips, is now joined by a low, continuous hum, the kind you feel in your chest as much as you hear in your ears. It's the sound of water threading through channels, filling crevices and pushing softly against stone. In places where the ridge drops into narrow gaps, you hear the muted rush of water as it funnels inward, the volume rising and falling with the rhythm of each slow pulse. Small creatures respond to the change. A lobopodian on the ridge beside you lifts its head, sensing the shift in the water's taste and temperature before stepping deliberately into the deepening flow. From the corner of your eye, you catch the faint shimmer of trilobites returning from deeper waters, their legs working quickly to climb against the current so they can reach the feeding grounds, now opening again. The tide does not come in a straight line. It curls and bends, folding around obstacles, spilling into basins, and then retreating slightly before pressing forward again. Its patience is absolute. Every inch of the shore will be reclaimed, not by force, but by inevitability. You wade slowly into the advancing water. The pull is constant but gentle, and you find yourself breathing in its rhythm, long inhales as the tide draws past you, long exhales as it steadies before its next quiet step forward. The moon above, nearly full, casts a pale column of light on the surface far offshore, and you can almost trace that column all the way to your feet, as though the light itself were the line by which the ocean returns. The sound around you is different now, not just the tide's voice, but the mingled quiet of countless small arrivals. You hear the faint clink of shells shifting in the sand, the whisper of fins cutting through shallows, the soft rasp of unseen feeders resuming their work. It is not a chorus, but a collection of small, steady voices, each answering the moon in its own way. As the water reaches your waist, the ridge behind you is swallowed, its footprints and textures hidden until the tide retreats again. Ahead, the deeper channels are beginning to change, currents thickening, shadows shifting. Somewhere in that dark movement, larger lives stir, moving toward the shore's edge under the cover of the moon's patient pull. You turn toward that deeper water, the tide at your back urging you forward. Its strength is quiet, but you feel it now in unshakable certainty that the sea will always return, no matter how far it withdraws. With each slow step, you follow that certainty into the dark beyond the ridge. Beyond the ridge, the returning tide spreads over a low plain littered with fragments, minute shells, curled tubes, and the faint shimmer of mineralized plates no longer attached to the living creatures that built them. The water here is only waist deep, but the seafloor feels less like sand and more like a mosaic, every step pressing against a scatter of shapes smoothed by time. The current threads through this place in gentle sweeps. Each fragment, no matter how small, catches the flow, sending tiny spirals of water curling away from it. Those spirals carry fine grains of silt, which settle again in patterns that mimic the shapes of the shells themselves. Soft drifts in the lee of a curve, a thin crescent shadow behind the jagged edge of a broken plate. You kneel, letting your fingers rest among the debris. The variety is staggering. Spiral shells no larger than a grain of rice, narrow tubes fluted with perfect ridges, flattened discs with faint radiating lines. Some still gleam faintly under the moon-filtered water, catching silvery highlights before fading back into shadow. Others are dulled, their edges worn, their colors muted to the soft browns and grays of the seabed. Among these fragments, life moves quietly. Tiny worm-like bodies thread between shell pieces, slipping from one pocket of cover to the next. Small arthropods, scarcely bigger than a pinhead, cling to the undersides of curved plates, shifting only when the light catches them. In one shallow hollow, you spot a miniature trilobite no bigger than your fingernail, working its way methodically over a ridged tube, scraping at the film of microbial growth that coats it. The current here is stronger than it feels on your skin, and you can see its subtle work in the way the lighter shells lift and drift before settling again. Sometimes a single piece is caught just right and spins slowly in place, rotating with a hypnotic steadiness until it finds a resting angle. Others shift only slightly, clicking softly against their neighbors as the tide brushes past. The soundscape is delicate, subtle clicks, the faint hiss of sand moving across hard surfaces, the gentle thrum of water through narrow gaps. Every movement is small, but together they form a texture, a quiet language between current and debris. You shift your weight and a small cloud of silt rises, catching the moonlight like a puff of pale smoke before dispersing into the flow. The shells beneath your hand feel cool and smooth, some with edges so fine you can barely feel the transition from curve to water. Others are rougher, their surfaces etched by years of wear, their imperfections deepened into tiny channels where new life now holds on. Here and there you see fresher pieces, fragments still bright with mineral sheen, perhaps shed in the last tide. These stand out against the older worn field, their colors faint but distinct, a blush of copper along one spiral, a soft green tint clinging to a narrow tube. They seem almost out of place among the muted tones, but you know they will join them soon enough, their brightness dimming as they settle deeper into the seabed. The moonlight above shifts as a cloud passes, and for a moment the whole plain dims to near darkness. In that softer light, more movement reveals itself, tiny creatures emerging from beneath shells emboldened by the cover. Their outlines are faint, their motions deliberate, legs testing the current before moving, antennae sweeping arcs through the water. As the light returns, they retreat again, vanishing into the cracks and hollows between fragments. You remain still, feeling the water's steady pulse over the shell field, the endless conversation between tide and stone, life and death, movement and rest. Ahead, the plain gives way to deeper shadows, where the current seems to flow not just over the seafloor, but through something softer and less certain, forms that drift in place, neither anchored to the bottom nor free to roam far. The pull of that movement draws you forward into the quiet sway of the open night. Deepens here, not in force but in body. It feels thicker somehow, as if the water itself has become more substantial. You sense it before you see the reason. This stretch of sea is crowded with drifters. They are not swimmers in the way fish are, nor rooted like the reefs behind you. They are passengers of the current, soft-bodied beings whose lives depend on the tides and the flow of water. The first one you notice is barely larger than your palm, a translucent bell that pulses slowly, each contraction sending it upward in a gentle, wavering rise before it surrenders to the drift and begins to sink again. The moonlight filters down through the surface, dim and fractured, and catches faintly in their bodies. It reveals details you could not see otherwise. Fine, hair-like filaments hanging from the edges of their bells, swaying in the current, faint radial lines in their transparent tissue, like spokes on a wheel made of glass. Some seem entirely clear, while others hold a smoky blush of pink, blue, or green, as if the water itself had painted them in whispers of color. You move slowly, careful not to disturb them. The water here carries countless such shapes, some round, some elongated, some so thin they are almost invisible until the light bends through them. A few are larger, half the length of your arm, their bodies ribboned with faint lines of pulsing light. They do not flash abruptly, but glow in slow waves, like embers breathing under the tide. Every so often, one drifter brushes lightly against another, and the contact sends a soft shiver through both bodies before they part again. They have no voices, yet the water between them carries a kind of silent conversation, a constant sensing of each other's presence, a shared journey through the dark. Near your knee, a chain of smaller drifters moves past, linked not by touch but by proximity, each following the faint disturbance left by the one ahead. Their bells open and close in perfect unison, a living pattern that slides through the current without breaking formation. You pause and simply let the water carry you for a moment. The density of life here makes the sea feel less like an empty expanse and more like a vast breathing body. The drifters sway around you, some close enough to touch, others passing far above or below. Every movement is slow, measured, and without urgency. In this place, there is no need for haste. The tide itself is the only engine, and it will take them wherever it goes. Now and then, one of the larger forms dips towards you, and you see tiny flecks inside its body, plankton caught in its trailing filaments, slowly drawn inward. The process is unhurried, almost ceremonial. Energy is gathered here in quiet increments, taken without struggle from the endless drift of the sea. Above, the moonlight shifts again as another cloud passes, dimming the world until the drifters are barely visible. And yet in the dark, some of them seem to shine faintly on their own, pale outlines glowing just enough to mark their positions. They hover there like distant lanterns suspended in the deep guiding nothing, needing no path but the one the tide provides. The coolness of the water is more pronounced here. You feel it in your fingertips and along your arms as you drift between these living veils. The sounds of the open sea are muffled, replaced by the soft rush of the current sliding past countless delicate forms. You become aware of your own movements, the way your body displaces water, the subtle pressure changes you leave behind, and how quickly those disturbances fade in the stillness. Ahead, the density of drifters thins, the water opening up again. In the space beyond, you catch the faint impression of larger, darker shapes moving, shapes that keep to the edge of the light, content to remain in shadow. You let the current carry you towards them, the last of the glowing veils slipping past your shoulders, and the water around you begins to feel more open, the night heavier with depth. The last of the soft-bodied drifters fades into the darkness behind you, leaving the water ahead broad and uncluttered. You feel it almost immediately, the shift in the current's tone. It is deeper here, slower, as if you have stepped into the exhale of something vast. This is the open approach to the continental shelf's edge, where the shallows fall away into a depth the moonlight cannot reach. The slope beneath your feet becomes less certain, the sand giving way to a mixture of scattered stone and loose sediment that shifts under your weight. Each step is quieter now, absorbed by the density of the water and the endless open space ahead. The current does not push so much as it draws, an invisible tug, the same pull that guides tides, drifters, and all things toward the deeper heart of the sea. You pause and simply let yourself float. With stillness comes the awareness of another rhythm beneath the one you breathe. It is faint, a long, low surge that swells and retreats, separate from the smaller movements of the tide. You feel it in the slight lift of your body every few moments, in the way the fine silt stirs and settles at your feet. It is the ocean's slow pulse, the distant echo of forces far below the surface. The sound here is different too. The high, delicate textures of the shallows are gone, replaced by a deep, continuous hush. It is not silence, but the sound of distance, of water moving in volume so large that its voice becomes a single unbroken note. In the background, you think you hear the occasional muted crack of shifting stone, the creak of submerged ridges adjusting under pressures older than memory. Small lives still move here, though they keep close to the bottom. Pale, eyeless creatures no longer than your fingers slide between the stones, their bodies bending like ribbons in the pull of the current. From time to time, a shadow crosses overhead, too far to see clearly, its shape dissolving before you can fix it in your mind. Whatever it is moves without hurry, confident in the protection of the depth. The slope drops more steeply ahead. When you step forward, the seabed disappears into a soft blue haze that fades to black. Somewhere beyond that darkness lies the true shelf drop, where the seafloor plunges and the water grows colder, heavier, and less forgiving. The thought of that space is not frightening exactly, but it stirs something in you, an awareness of scale, of the impossibility of seeing all that moves in a place so vast. You kneel to touch the sand here. It is cooler, finer, and less disturbed than in the shallows. The grains cling lightly to your fingers before drifting away in the pull of the slow pulse. They vanish downward faster than you expect, carried into the slope's shadow. The water is so still otherwise that each falling grain seems to mark the passing of time itself. You remain for a while, breathing with the rhythm of the sea, inhale as the unseen swell lifts you fractionally upward. Exhale as it retreats, leaving you weightless for a heartbeat before the next rise. The vastness of the water ahead is not empty. It is full of movements so slow and so far-reaching that it feels almost still. Far below, at the edge of perception, you think you sense a different kind of current, one warmer, sliding beneath the cooler layer you stand in now. It passes quickly, vanishing into the deep, but it leaves the faintest change in the water's scent, as if it has traveled far, carrying whispers of places beyond this sea. You take one last look into the dark ahead. The shelf's edge is there, just beyond the reach of your vision, patient and unchanging. It does not invite or refuse. It simply waits, as it always has, as it always will. You turn slightly, letting the slow pulse guide you sideways along the slope, toward a place where the sea's deep breath meets the stone's ancient memory. The slope steadies into a broad, level bench of stone, its surface smoothed by centuries of slow current. At first, it appears bare, a solid expanse stretching into the dim blue haze, but as you draw closer, you begin to notice patterns in its skin, lines, ridges, and faint depressions that do not belong to the stone itself. These are impressions left long before this night, before these waters, before much of what you've seen on your journey. Fossils, not the hardened remains of the creatures you've just encountered, but older imprints, pressed into the rock when the world was different still. They lie scattered like riddles across the stone, spirals no larger than a fingertip, branching grooves like delicate fronds, and the faint shadow of segmented shapes unlike any you've seen alive. The moonlight filtering from above catches on certain angles, and the markings sharpen for an instant before fading again into subtle texture. You kneel, letting your hands drift over the surface. The stone is cool and faintly grainy, the pattern shallow enough that you can trace them with a fingertip. Each one is silent, but each tells the same truth. Something lived here once, moved here, rested here, and is gone now, leaving only its outline behind. Some shapes are clear and whole, preserved as if the creature stepped away only moments ago. Others are fractured, worn by currents, their edges blurred until they are only suggestions of what they once were. In certain patches, the fossil impressions overlap, one life pressed into another, as if time layered them like pages in a book you can only read in fragments. Yet the stone is not dead. Living forms cling to these ancient surfaces. Fine films of microbial mats settle into the grooves, catching and holding the faint drift of nutrients from the water. Small, slow-moving grazers work their way along the ridges, their feeding paths tracing new lines across the old. Tiny anemone-like creatures sway in the shallows, their tentacles folding into the fossil depressions when the current stirs too strongly. You lean closer to a spiral no wider than your palm. The grooves are filled with a pale, downy growth that shifts when you exhale near it. A small arthropod no larger than a grain of rice emerges from the spiral's center, its legs working carefully as it moves across the fossil's edge before vanishing again into a nearby crack. In that moment, the line between past and present blurs. This ancient imprint, once the shape of life, now providing shelter for something alive tonight. The current here is gentle, almost reverent. It slides over the stone in long, unbroken sweeps, stirring the soft films and coaxing fine silt into the deeper cuts. Each pass leaves the fossils a little more obscured, a little more changed, as though the ocean is slowly rewriting their stories. You find yourself imagining the world in which these shapes were first made, Seas without the creatures you've met, skies without the moonlight you stand in now. It is a thought both humbling and grounding. This bench of stone is a meeting place of ages, the past locked in its surface, the present alive upon it, and the future already beginning to take root. For a while, you let your hands rest against the cool, living rock, feeling the slow growths beneath your palms and the subtle vibrations of water passing over the hole. The fossils hold still, but the life that now clings to them moves constantly, even if so slowly that you cannot see it change. When you rise, the patterns remain behind you, undisturbed. The current will continue its slow work here, smoothing edges, settling silt, and letting each riddle fade at its own pace. Ahead, the bench narrows, curving toward a place where the surface begins to break into low, irregular mounds. There, a fine mist seems to rise from the stone, water warmer than its surroundings, stirring into the cooler layers above. The broad, flat bench of fossil-marked stone narrows into a series of irregular mounds, each one rounded and dark under the shifting light. You notice it first as a change in sensation. The water here is warmer, subtle but certain, brushing over your legs with a softness that stands out against the cooler flow beyond. As you draw nearer, you see how the warmth shapes the water. Thin, wavering curtains of distortion rise from the mounds, bending the light as if the sea itself is exhaling. These streams twist upward in slow spirals, mingling with the cooler layers above until they vanish into the silver haze of moonlight at the surface. From this depth, it looks almost like mist lifting quietly from the ocean's skin. The effect is mesmerizing. Where the warm water rises, the fine silt on the stone stirs and dances, never settling. Tiny particles glint briefly before vanishing again into the currents. The motion is not hurried. It has the patience of something that has been happening for countless tides and will continue for countless more. You kneel beside one of the mounds, letting your hand hover just above it. The warmth is concentrated here, radiating upward in an even flow that brushes against your skin and makes the cooler water around it feel sharper by contrast. The mound itself is not bare stone. It is clothed in a thin layer of microbial growth, shimmering faintly in the shifting light. The surface seems to pulse ever so slightly, as though the life clinging to it is tuned to the rhythm of the water's rise. Small creatures gather here, drawn by the difference. A line of tiny trilobites traces a slow circle around the base of one mound, their antennae sweeping in wide arcs as they graze. A pair of soft-bodied worms stretch upward from the stone, letting the rising water bring food directly to their waiting mouths. Even minute drifting organisms seem to linger longer here, caught in the gentler lift before continuing their journey into the cooler layers above. The soundscape has changed again. The deep, continuous hush of the shelf's edge is still present, but now it is punctuated by faint pops and murmurs, small air pockets released from the warm stone, streams of bubbles so fine they feel more like texture than noise. When you tilt your head, you can hear the delicate hiss of the water sliding over uneven edges, a whisper of movement hidden under the larger voice of the sea. As you watch, one rising stream of warmth bends unexpectedly, caught by a passing current. The distortion sways sideways before curling back toward its original path, the shape twisting into a loose spiral before dissolving into the layers above. It's an ephemeral thing, always forming, always vanishing, yet the effect is endless, each moment replaced seamlessly by the next. The warmth is comforting, almost lulling, but it also carries a faint, mineral-rich scent. It tastes of the deep earth beneath the sea, of stone and heat mingled in a way the open water never has. You take in a slow breath, letting that taste linger, and imagine the unseen spaces far below where this warmth begins, places you will not see, but whose presence reaches you here in the quiet night. When you finally stand, the mist-like streams are still rising, indifferent to your passing. Beyond the mounds, the stone slopes upward toward shallower water again, where the surface glow brightens faintly. Somewhere ahead, the horizon is beginning to change color, the first breath of dawn working its way into the deep blue. You move toward it, the last trace of warmth fading from your skin as you step back into the cooler current, leaving the silent exhalations of the ocean behind. The slope beneath you grows shallower, the water lightening shade by shade as you rise toward the surface. The deep cobalt of night gives way to a muted blue-gray, and above that, something softer still, a faint bloom of pale color resting along the edge of the world. It's not yet sunlight, not the warmth of morning, but the first quiet hint of it. A powdery band of silver blue stretches across the horizon, as though the night itself has thinned there. The transition is so gradual you almost doubt it at first, but then you notice how the moon's reflection, once crisp and bright, now shares the water's surface with this new diffused glow. From below, the effect is dreamlike. The light filters down in longer, gentler shafts, touching the seafloor with the faintest suggestion of day. The shells, stones, and soft films you pass over catch this color in ways that make them look changed. Edges less sharp, shadows no longer black but tinted in that soft horizon blue. The current here is mild, as if it too is slowing to acknowledge the shift. Small creatures are on the move again, stirred not by urgency but by this subtle turning of the earth. A pair of trilobites scuttle across a sand ripple toward a familiar feeding ground. A slow worm rises halfway from its burrow, tasting the water for change before slipping back in to wait for full light. You break the surface briefly, the air cool and damp against your face. The horizon line is more distinct now. Above it, the sky holds its pale bloom. Below, the sea reflects it, doubling the space it occupies. The moon, low and fading in brightness, still lingers in the opposite sky, reluctant to leave entirely. Lowering yourself back under, you drift toward the shallows where the water is alive with tiny glints, plankton catching the newborn light, suspended like dust in an awakening room. Every movement of your hand sends slow spirals of these specks drifting away, only for them to settle again, floating in the gentle sway. A distant ridge becomes clearer ahead, its outline sharper in the growing glow. Behind it, the world will be brighter still, but here in the transitional water, you're suspended between two realms, the cool hush of night and the promise of warmth to come. The pale band along the horizon widens, and with it the surface begins to carry streaks of pink and gold so faint they seem more imagined than seen. You watch them shift and ripple with the smallest movements of the tide, colors sliding across the water's skin before dissolving into the blue-gray again. This is the sea's quietest turning, the moment before the sky tips fully into day, before the light floods the shallows and sends the night's slower lives into hiding. You remain still, letting the horizon's color work its way into the water around you until even the stones beneath your feet seem touched by it. Ahead, the ridge waits, and beyond it, the tide pools will soon gleam in the first direct rays of the sun. You step forward, the current at your back, carrying you toward that brighter edge. The ridge ahead rises gently from the shallows, its surface wet and gleaming from the tide's slow retreat. You climb it with careful steps, the water sliding from your legs as you emerge into the cool air. The sound changes here, less the muffled hush of submersion, more the soft patter and trickle of water finding its way back to the sea through hidden cracks and channels. On the other side, tide pools spread out in uneven steps, each one a shallow mirror. Only moments ago, they were dim bowls of blue-gray shadow, but now the first rays of sunlight spill across them. The change is immediate and striking. The glassy surfaces flash with gold, and the life within stirs as if in quiet acknowledgement. In the nearest pool, a cluster of trilobites moves slowly over the stone, their carapaces catching the light in sharp metallic gleams. Some show deep bronze tones, others the pale glint of polished copper. As they turn, the plates of their segmented bodies catch and release the sunlight in a rhythm that seems almost deliberate. Tiny spines along their sides throw thin, dark shadows onto the pool floor, delicate as etchings. Elsewhere, small-shelled creatures lift themselves slightly from the substrate, their ridges and coils glowing faintly in the slanted light. The water's surface ripples with the smallest of breezes, bending the sunlight into patterns that dance over their shells like firelight on metal. You watch these shifting shapes for a long moment, the interplay of gold and shadow, a quiet performance for whoever is patient enough to see it. In one pool, a soft-bodied worm drapes itself over the edge of a stone, its damp skin glistening in dawn's first warmth. Tiny drops cling to the ridges along its back, and when it shifts, those drops scatter light into brief, sharp flashes before slipping back into the water. A few smaller grazers cling to its sides, their own shells reflecting the same thin band of sunlight. You kneel beside a larger pool, the rock cool under your palms. The water here is deeper, and the sun's angle strikes low, piercing through the surface to illuminate the bottom in a rich, warm glow. Even the silt drifting lazily in the water seems gilded, every particle turning into a fleck of light before it settles. The air is crisp and carries the scent of the sea, salt, stone, and something faintly sweet from the life that has spent the night here. Insects, primitive and sparse, move along the wet stone between pools, their bodies beaded with droplets that refract the morning's gold into tiny prisms. They pause now and again, their movements almost cautious before slipping down to drink from the warm shallows. As the sun climbs higher, the light intensifies. Shadows shrink, colors sharpen. The trilobites quicken their pace, weaving paths across the pool floor that intersect and diverge without pause. The reflections on their carapaces grow brighter until each one seems edged in fire. Even the smallest spines throw a crisp, fine shadow across the stone, a mark of their quiet persistence. You breathe in deeply, the air cool but touched now with the first hint of warmth. All around you, the pools hold a living stillness, active but unhurried, aware but unconcerned. The sun's arrival is not a signal to rush, but a reminder that another cycle has begun. The night's patient work has ended, the day's patient work will take its place. Beyond these pools, the shoreline stretches away, bathed in a growing flood of light. The far edge shimmers faintly, the colors of the horizon melting upward into the clear morning sky. You take a final glance into the gold-lit water beside you, watching one trilobite slip behind a stone and vanish, leaving only a fading ripple behind. It is time to move on. The light now stretches unbroken across the shore, spilling over stone and sand alike. The tide pools behind you flash and flicker under the full weight of the morning, their surfaces alive with movement. Every ripple sends gold darting across the undersides of rocks, across the shells and spines of the creatures within. The shadows of the trilobites are shorter now, their edges sharper, each plate of their bodies etched clearly against the illuminated seafloor. The air has warmed slightly, carrying the scent of the night's retreat, salt sharper than before, the faint mineral tang of freshly uncovered stone, and the earthy sweetness of algae beginning its day's work in the light. You step forward along the ridge, the rock drying beneath your feet, its surface growing rougher as the thin layer of water evaporates into the cool air.
Beyond the tide pools, mateys.
The beach is alive in a quieter, slower way. Priapulid burrows dimple the damp sand, the faintest rises and falls showing where the worms beneath breathe in time with the sea. Some lie closer to the receding water's edge, their openings glistening faintly in the sun, ready for the next tide. The microbial mats across the flats shine wet and dark, patterned in the familiar ripples left by the night's gentle waves. Farther along, you can see the low terraces of stromatolites, their surfaces glistening as the last of the tidewater drains away in tiny rivulets. Small creatures navigate their slopes, grazing along the edges of shallow pools that have only minutes before they warm and vanish. Every part of this place is moving, changing, adjusting to the return of the light. You pause and look outward toward the water. The sea is a sheet of rippling silver now, the sun's reflection so bright it hides the depths you wandered through in the night. Somewhere beneath that surface, the archaeocyaths continue their slow filtering. The opabenia glide in the shallows, the wiwaxia graze across the basins, and the anomalocaris sweeps the deeper currents in its wide arcs. You cannot see them now, but you can feel their presence, the invisible web of life that extends far beyond the reach of your sight. The sounds of the morning have shifted as well. The soft hush of the returning tide has given way to a brighter, more intricate layering, the trickle of water retreating through narrow channels, The delicate snap of small shells settling in the sand and the faint patter of droplets falling from higher rock ledges. Even the air itself seems to carry a different tone now, lighter and more open, touched by the slow warming of the land. You draw a long breath, tasting the mingled freshness of the morning air and the salt of the sea. It feels like a beginning, though here every day begins as it has for millions of years, without ceremony, without interruption. The cycles repeat, but each day brings its own slight shifts, its own new patterns in the sand, its own different glint of light on shell and spine. Turning toward the inland edge of the shore, soon you see where the damp sand gives way to higher ground, stone ridges and low outcroppings that will hold their warmth through the day. The path ahead is open, but your gaze drifts back toward the sea once more. The water is bright now, too bright to look at for long, but you hold the sight in your mind. The night's deep blue replaced with a living silver, the horizon sharp and unbroken, the whole expanse breathing under the new sun. You take a final step forward, feeling the warmth of the first true rays on your skin. Behind you, the tide pools, the ridges, the drifters, and the slow architects of reefs all continue their own mornings, indifferent to your leaving. Before you, the land and sea stretch into a day that will move as all days do here, slowly, patiently, inevitably. The first day on this young earth has begun.